Welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the quick tips and tricks for Revit. The 5 topics I'm going to cover today is use AutoCAD to hide unwanted edges within Revit. How do you move new topo to existing topo within Revit? How you create 3D property lines so that you can slice and dice when you're at elevation or section. Next, I'm going to be talking about how to use model text object as a model replacement. I'm going to show you a couple of tricks you can use. And finally, I'm going to be talking about generic model and how you slice it to a unique shape. So let's go to the demo. Within Revit, you are going to encounter objects that is imported from either DWG or SketchUp. So this is the first thing you're going to see. It's a very heavy, well, basically lines that is, it's a pretty messy thing. When you're trying to print, this is what you're going to get. It's lined with all this blotchiness. So what I want to do in this particular demonstration is that how do you hide those lines so that you don't see those extra generic lines. When you print this more towards, let's say, 1/8 of a drawing, what tends to happen is that this line looks really ugly, and when you have a smaller drawings, this could be very noticeable. So here I'm just gonna quickly export this out as a DWG. Okay, just do that. Next thing I want to do is that I'm just going to export out the drawings. Next, I'm going to go into the AutoCAD. Now, the unfortunate thing about Revit, before I go into the AutoCAD, is that Revit does not allow you to hide those extra lines. There's no way of doing it. So you kind of have to use AutoCAD to do that. So while I was inside the AutoCAD, the next thing you want to do is just open up that file. Okay, then export. So I'm just going to zoom extend. This is what you're going to see. Okay, nothing too special. Now the first thing you want to do is that when you click on it, it's going to basically turn it into just one object, block. You can exploit them. This is where I encourage people, if you want to split those objects into a separate thing, I would recommend you creating layers. So let's say, for example, I'm going to create seats. Just give it a color. Let's say I'm going to go green. In this particular case, in this, I'm going to go properties, and I'm just going to call seats. So in here, if you want to isolate objects, I typically go right click here and say isolate objects. Next thing you could do here is that since they're just one object itself is a mesh, you can further explode it and then it becomes individual object. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the command called edge. Okay, that's the command that you want to use inside AutoCAD. You type it in, okay, edge, come on. Sometimes it does this. Yeah, sometimes AutoCAD hang for some odd reason. I don't know if it has to do with the software. Next, it would just prompt you this message, and what you can do is that you just go pick the edges. Now, the reason why you're seeing objects that's just displaying is that it's because you're in this mode called the 3D wireframe. So what you want to do is that if you want to turn it to 2D wireframe, you want to type in the command called shape mode. In here, it gives you a couple of options. By default, this icon represents it's a 3D sketch mode, but default it's always going to be 2D wireframe. So this is what you're going to see. And now when you use the same command, you notice that it starts to hide your object. So here I'm just going to go in here, hide my object. Okay, you keep doing it until you get what you want. Okay, let's say for example this is, I already hide those edge, and now what happens is that if you do it a couple more times, it's going to look more or less like this. Okay, you can go in here again. If you hate the object, let's say for example here it shows up that little, all you have to do is just keep using the edge command, just go 3DO. Okay. 3DO is 3D orbit. Okay, it's just basically orbiting the way you want it to see. There's another command that if you want to display, let's say you made a mistake of picking the wrong edge. Okay, let's say for example I made a mistake, I picked the wrong edge to hide. What you could do is that you could type in SPL frame. Okay, that's the command, and change it to 1. And when you regenerate, what it does is that it's going to show all the faceted kind of edge. So here I'm just going to go edge. Okay, and then I'm just going to pick that again, and then SPL frame, and pick 0, and there we go. So brought it back. So this is pretty useful, especially if you want to hide certain object. AutoCAD is a perfect tool for that. Okay, so when you go shade mode and then you go conceptual, this is what it's going to look like. Now sometimes what happens is that people will set this to transparency. Let's say 2D. So what I typically like to do with this is I like to select all this object, go to my properties, and you notice that there's transparency. I'm just going to set it back to 0. Okay, no transparency, so that it becomes part of not transparent. So basically it becomes solid object. If you want to configure it, you can do it yourself. The problem is that once you change certain color or certain transparency, Revit has no way of undo that changes. So you kind of have to do it inside AutoCAD to make sure that you get this result you want inside Revit. Now inside AutoCAD, I always recommend that users do not change this layer or don't change it to, let's say, green, or force it to be a certain color, because Revit has no way of changing that back. So what I typically recommend is that if you're receiving this drawing, always change it to by layer. Okay, same as line type. All right, and then line weight as well. So we'll just define it inside Revit. If you set this to your own line weight, there's no way you can configure it inside Revit. Okay, so those are tips. Once you've satisfied with what you like, save that. Okay, I'm just going to close out of this. And within Revit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this. Okay, and simply just insert. Okay, import CAD, and say that's fix. You could say current view only. Now current view is only going to apply for if it's a plan elevation section. I typically just turn that off. Color preserve, you can put it black and white, but I always like to put it as preserved. Layers, if you turn on all the layers, I recommend by default choosing all, but sometimes you want certain layers to be hidden and you don't want it to show up. Let's say temporary layer, I'd say visible would probably be your choice. And the rest, just keep it as it is. If you know that the units is already inches, just put it in and hit open. Okay, next thing you want to do is you want to go in, select that object, and hit that visibility and say do not show on plan and RCP. Now you notice that all that edges that I've done before, you see it hidden all that edge. So this will give you a much better and cleaner look, especially if you're doing anything inside Revit. If you want to use that 3D object and make it print properly, this is the way to go. Okay, it's very good, very easy to set it up. Just have to know AutoCAD. I know that some people don't want to use AutoCAD, but just use the technique. And if you do run into issues, you can always create stuff within Revit, but it's going to be a little bit more tougher. Whereas if you do it this way, you do use Edge or some of the commands I've shown you, everything should work. Okay, the next topic I'm going to talk about is how do you move existing into the new. So let's say I'm going to create a new project. Okay, I'm going to use this tool called the BIM Tech tool. If you guys never heard of it, they're basically based in Czech Republic. So here what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to go BIM Tech tool. They're from Czech. And what do they have is that, let me change it to English so you guys can see it. You can download the plugin for free. Okay. They have plugins for AutoCAD, Revit, AutoCAD, as well as SketchUp. So the nicest thing about this is that you can create a 3D terrain and add, like, let's say Google Maps into your software. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this, click on Cartesian map. Okay. By default, you have to register with them so that you get this access to their maps. So here I'm just going to go in, excuse me. Just going to go to the where I'm working right now. So I'm at Waterfront. Okay, if you don't know Vancouver, it's basically the one with the sailboat kind of place. So right here, you click on the 3D terrain. You can go 180 by 180, and you can say I want to add in a orthographic. Okay. So here I'm just going to say, okay, I want this terrain and insert that into my project. This is pretty good, especially if you are doing more or less like a 3D kind of a map, very quick, very easy. You don't really need to kind of worry about whether the information is correct. Then this is kind of a way to start, right? Especially when you're doing a lot of massing, this could really help you. There we go. Now I'm just gonna make the Topo Map. Okay, so let's go to site. Now you will run into issues where you're gonna make a copy of this Topo Map. Okay, let's assume that you're gonna have this as an original. This is original. I'm just gonna make it. Let's change the scale to 1 to 500. Okay, so let's say this is original. You want to make a copy of that, and then this one I'm just gonna say this is modify. Okay, let's say for example in here I'm just gonna make a modification to this. I'm just gonna say I'm gonna add a swath of land to that, and then I'm just gonna say finished. Okay, so let's say this is the original, this is one, this is the modified link. How do you differentiate between one or the other? Now you could use DWG export and then we import the AutoCAD just to get the point, but in this case I want to do it within Revit, so you don't have to do that. First thing you want to do is that you want to edit the surface. Okay, within this point right now you can click on the reference plane. Within that reference plane you notice that, oh, I could basically snap onto one of those points. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. It's just draw a reference plane in one of the points, hit OK. Next thing you want to do is that you want to go edit that and select all that and move it. Okay, it will snap onto that particular reference plane, and when you hit OK, that's where it goes. Okay, you notice that right now the previous one I deleted the swath of land. You notice that there's a differences between the two. Okay, so this is pretty good if you want to kind of do like before and after. Okay, before you want to just leave it as it is, and then the new one you just want to like basically check and see and make sure that both of those topos are aligned with each other. Okay, pretty useful. So the next trick I'm going to talk about is the 3D property line. I know that a lot of users they don't know that this does exist inside Revit. I'm just going to close the program so that just keep it clear. So I'm just going to open up this particular project. So by default, when you draw in any property lines, it's always going to be in two-dimensional. So oops, I'm just going to exit out of that. So when you go into the plan, this is what you get. You draw it in, and then when you cut into a section, let's for example here, and go to that, you notice that there is no section. Okay, that's the bummer about Revit, is that it doesn't give you that 3D property line. So here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to show you how to create that. First thing you want to do is that you go to component and just say model in place. Next thing you want to do is that you want to select the site. Okay, here I'm just going to say property 3D. Next thing you want to do is that you want to do extrusion. Here I'm just going to basically pick the edge. Now the unfortunate thing about Revit is that you kind of have to ignore this because not all property lines going to be straight. But unfortunately, I've been asking Autodesk to shut this off because it's very annoying, but unfortunately they haven't had that fixed. Okay, once you have this edge in, the first thing you want to do is that you want to add in the start extrusion. Start. And then the next thing you want to do here is that you want to do an extrusion. I want to basically make it 100 feet so that I get some breathing room. The next thing you want to do is that you want to put a material. This is not a requirement, but it's very good to have if you are trying to do it in 3D mode, if you use 3D mode a lot. Now the main thing that you have to put in is the subcategory. If you never used it, what it does is that it makes Revit break up the objects as you kind of export certain things out. So in here, I'm just going to choose the property line. Okay, just choose that property line, hit OK. Right now it's in 3D. Now you notice that when I hit escape, it's not going to do anything until I finish it. Okay, the model's there. Okay, when it cuts, but you're not going to see it. Okay, until you go to 3D mode. So for this particular case, I'm going to go edit. You notice that here I could say start extrusion -20 feet. There you go. And now what I said before is that you can add material, but material is very important if you're doing it more in the 3D mode. So here I'm just going to say your cavity as required. And there we go. So you have a 3D property line already embedded. So here I'm just going to go edit in place again. Okay, so I always select that and say do not show in reflective seeing plan. I always turn it off if you have an existing, or what you can do is that you could draw in symbolic line, right? So in the plan and RCP you don't show that, you just show the 2D symbolic line and you hit OK. Okay, now what you can do is that you can go section. You notice that that particular 3D property line is showing up, but it hides my model, my building. So what you're going to do is you're going to go into the visibility graphics, go to filter. First thing you want to do is that just add the property 3D, choose the site. Okay, next thing you want to do is that choose the type name. It's going to be equal to property 3D. Hit OK, and then you click on the property 3D, hit the transparency and hit 100%. When you hit OK, now you're good to go. Okay, so the three property lines there, and let's say I'm going to change this section. So I'm going to move it to here, go back again. There we go. This is very good if you're doing a lot of section cut and stuff like that. This is a perfect way to do it. The reason why you want to do this is that you do not want to keep on putting in the 2D detail lines, because in the past that's what a lot of people do. That's the workaround. But in this particular case, this object is already there, so when you cut through multiple section, it still show up. Nicest thing about 3D property line is that you can do curve surfaces, and you can do whatever shape you want and it still cut through it. So that's the nicest thing about using 3D property line versus if you're using line. Line's never accurate, unfortunately, so I always recommend just use the actual object like a 3D property line. So if you have a setback, again, you can just do the same thing, just say, okay, indicating that it's a 5 feet or 5 meter setback from the property line. And that way you shows, another line. So it's a good way so that when users are encroaching into a certain boundary, it will detect it, or you can see it on 3D model. Hopefully you find that useful. I find that very useful. I use it in all the projects just to remind users that 3D property line does exist inside Revit. So the next thing I'm going to show you is that using 3D model text to model your things so that you don't have to model a lot of your complicated geometry. What I mean by that is you can just go into the 3D model. I'm just going to use a simple text like this. Let's say I want to do a crisscross, right? So all I have to do is just draw that text, edit that text, go in reversed, and make them match like that. Okay, very useful. So what you can do is that you can do various shape. I typically use it especially if you want to do, let's say, a wayfinding, a path. So what I typically do here is that I would create what's known as symbols. Okay, I would choose one of those default windows. So if it's a webding, wingding 2 and 3, so I'm just going to pick that. So right now you get the symbols. When you go into Windows starts and run, and then just type in the character map. In here you can say, okay, wingding. Now the interesting thing about this is that you can actually see that there's buttons like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I usually use elevator for that. If you are using like elevator with buttons, that's a perfect way to do it. So here I got this particular one as a wayfinding. I'm just going to copy that. There's also a lot of other symbols as well, so you notice that's a good kind of like, you can move back and forth and see what you like. So I typically use wingding, okay, just like multiple, and then you can say, okay, I want this to be a target symbol, so let's do it. So I just put it in, and that becomes kind of like, target. So you know what this reminds me of? If you're using a stove, this could be basically be your burner, kind of a stovetop. So now this not only applies to model text, you can also go to website and download a whole whack of fonts. So the best one I would say is that you can go to .font.com. Okay, in here you have a lot of other shapes as well. So rather than modeling away all that detail, you can use text to represent your cornices, other wayfinding like picture frames, arrow sign, and all the other miscellaneous. Now they do have trees as well. There's also figures. You just have to go in there and just look for it. Perfect one would be trees. So rather than modeling your trees, what you can do with this is that you can use fonts. You change A, B, C, and then what happens is that it becomes different types of trees. Okay, very fast, very easy. It's already there. So what I typically recommend users is that use this, but do be careful, because if you are giving your model to, let's say, your consultant or whoever, make sure you include the font, because sometimes what happens is that the font that you install in your machine may not appear in another person's machine. So make sure you give them the fonts. Okay, I always run into issues where people go crazy with these fonts, but they don't include those fonts for a consultant, and sometimes they come back and ask us, what is this? Like, why is there a missing font? So there you go. So make sure you be careful with the font. So this does help you if you want to do like elevation quickly and stuff like that with all the trees already preset. This is a good opportunity to do it. There's also a lot of other stuff as well, so just go in there and just take a look. All right, my final session, my final tricks that I'm going to be showing you guys today would be the panel. Okay, so here I'm just going to open up a perforated panel that I've built. So let's say, for example, you have a panel, you have all this void already pre-built in like that. Okay, now what you want to do is that you want to create like a really curvilinear. So here I'm just going to load it into the current project. I'm just going to place it here. I'm just going to get rid of this. Now I'm going to put in a reference plane so that makes it a little bit easier later on when I do extrusion. I'm going to call that face and go here. Now let's assume that you have this panel. Now within this panel, what you want to do is that you want to do like a really curvilinear kind of a shape. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to go fill region. Let's say for example you want to draw that. Let's say that is your curve. Okay, just it could be any shape you want, but I'm just basically demonstrating that if you have like a really funky kind of a shape, you want to, let's say this is kind of like your shape that you want to create with this panel. Okay, I know that a lot of users would say, okay, just build it within adaptive components and go like all crazy with that stuff. You don't have to do that. You can just basically just do this very simply. Okay, so here I'm just gonna make it transparent. I'm just basically gonna copy the panel, make it so that it fits within that criteria. Let's say I'm just gonna copy that. And then here I'm just gonna use the same panel, just copy it up. Okay, just ignore that. Just telling you that, you know, the reference plane is no longer there. That's okay. I don't really care about that. The only thing is that you just want to cover the entire frame. Okay, so here I'm just going to copy that, and there we go. So assume that that's your panel. Now the thing is that you want to make sure the shape is what you cover. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to basically just move it down to there. Okay. Oops. So here I'm just going to do is that I want to do a cutout of that. So the next thing I want to do is that I want to use the model in place. Choose generic. I'm just going to go generic void. Okay. The first thing I would do is that I want to do the extrusion. Choose the face. Okay. This is why you have to create the reference plane, okay, or else it will not show up. Just pick that. Now I'm going to pick my object right there. I'm going to go 3D. This is what I have, and then say finish. Here I could say move it slightly over. Okay, so let's assume that this is the object I want to keep, but cut away the other stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to use what's known as the cut geometry. So first you make sure you pick the panel first, and then you pick that as the second. Okay. If you don't do that, what happened is that it's basically going to merge in with the panel. Okay. So let's say for example I pick this panel first and pick that panel second. If I go height that, you see that the panel is not cut, whereas this one is cut. So just make sure you understand which one goes first. So again, pick the panel, pick the panel, pick that, pick the panel, pick that. Okay, just keep doing it until you get the shape that you wanted. So let's say you will notice that sometimes you do get some angle that won't coordinate with the won't conform to the panel. That's the bug that I kind of have to, you know, adjust the angle of that or the shape of that curve, because sometimes what happens is that if the panel is like right smack in the middle of this curve, sometimes you just will not want to cut. So I'm just gonna select that. So this is a pretty, oops, I picked the wrong one. So cut this one with that. So this is a pretty quick kind of, you see that, yeah, you cannot cut. Yeah, sometimes it does that, okay? You will encounter that. Sometimes you have, there's not that much you can do about it, except just, you can either change the curve. I usually like to change the curve, Okay, just make it either bigger or smaller, or I can say, you know, that's one curve, and then I usually like to do, let's say, from here to there, that's my other curve, and then from here to there, that's my other curve. Okay, and then say finish. Let's see if it works. Sometimes it's going to give me error message, but in this case it doesn't. Now I'm just going to cut. Let's see if it works. There we go. Now it works. Sometimes it does the, oops, I picked the wrong one. So let's say I'm going to cut using this, and then that again. Yeah, it sometimes does that. It's kind of one of those weird things. You could do this. You can basically mirror the object. Okay, sometimes it will work if you mirror it, but for this case I'm just gonna leave it as it is. I'm just gonna get rid of that. Okay, but if you want to fill it in, just change the pattern, or you can mirror it and do offset. Let's say I'm gonna hide that, and you notice that the panel, okay, this panel I haven't cut it. So what you can do is that you can just go and cut that, and there we go. So you have a panel that conforms to the shape that you want it. Okay, it's not using any adaptive component, just use the simple generic model, and it just cut it through it. Well, hopefully that will help you a little bit, or you could do this for reflective ceiling with some sort of design that you want. I'm just showing you this. This is like a wall case, but you could certainly do it for the ceiling as well. And that concludes for tips and tricks, and hope you enjoy it. Thanks.